make you feel uncomfortable. Just so.
And that's like a monster sentence too.
What?
That's a monster sentence
yes.
too.
So whenever we have double hyphens here, that means that we can cross off for a moment. We can cross off everything in between because it's just additional information. For one, we have to go back and get it afterwards, but it's kind of like, it's just like when we have double commas, you know, like we're putting like so-and-so did this, which they never should have done, comma, because, or whatever. That middle part is always that additional information. So we're saying, although it is unwise to take a developmental view of an art like music, there are ways in which it makes sense to talk about musical knowledge growing over time. That is so much easier to understand than this hefty chunk in the middle, right?
Right, yeah.
No, 100%. But this hefty chunk in the middle is just referring to, what is this an example of?
Wouldn't that be like in parentheses or?
Yeah, well, yes, it's an example, but what are they saying it's an example of? Like, what is it, like, why are they even including it in this sentence?
Is it showing the musical knowledge growing over time?
I think it's showing the art like development. I think it's the developmental view.
The ways in which people take these views of development.
Okay. Yeah, it's unwise to take this developmental view of an art like music as if Beethoven were in advance of Josquin or Miles Davis in advance over Louis Armstrong. I'm assuming an art like music, development view of an art, that one of these, like Beethoven, I know is music. I don't know who Josquin is. Is he art?
No, he's a musician too, but so is an advance. This is just me guessing. I'm sorry.
No, come in.
But Miles Davis came after Louis Armstrong. So Josquin came after Beethoven. So these are musicians, but like Miles Davis and Louis Armstrong are both jazz musicians. Beethoven and Josquin are both classical pianists.
Well, you are amazing. Thank you.
I think it's also comparing them a little bit, isn't it?
Well, right. That's the goal of it. The goal of it is to say it's, well, even if I love that we, like, Amber knows what they are and how they're doing it, what they're doing, because that is going to help her significantly. The main goal here is that it's unwise to take a developmental view of an art like music. And in that parentheses is just our example. So the example really doesn't matter. And in here, it really doesn't matter because they're just throwing that in there to add this chunk in to get us confused. Can you see that? Like when Tori was reading it and it's like, wait, this is like 7 lines long. Where do I stop? But if we were going to dive deeper into understanding it, what Amber described is fabulous. But so we're saying, although it's unwise to take this developmental view of an art like music, there are ways in which it makes sense to talk about musical knowledge growing over time. So we're saying that, so what is this first part of the sentence here? What part of the argument is this? What would you call this? Lisa?
I mean, I haven't digested the rest of it, so I kind of feel like it's unfair to ask me that. Okay, so I'm gonna guess. I'm totally gonna guess.
Okay, I didn't know. You might be able to catch it just based on this sentence. If you can't, it's okay. Can you see what's an example of?
It makes sense to talk about. I mean, it's like it's an opinion. I mean, I don't know.
No, you're okay.
It's nonsense.
I think
it's a concession.
Like concession, yeah. Do you see that, Lisa? It's a concession again.
Oh, okay.
And so a concession is just granting the other side. And so it might not be overly important to this argument to know that, but it's just good for us to pick them up, be able to pick them out. So although it is unwise to take a developmental view of an art like music, so we're granting something, right? We're saying it's unwise to do this. Although there are ways in which it makes sense to talk about musical knowledge growing over time. All right, can you continue reading, Ashley, for us? Now that we've gotten through the first sentence.
We certainly know more about certain sounds than was known 5 centuries ago. That is, we understand how sounds that earlier composers avoided can be used effectively in musical compositions.
Okay,
T1.
what's going on there? Can you tell us?
So it's saying we know more now than we did before. And then if we can identify, like that second part is kind of,
And this,
identify.
so perfect. Yeah, I'm gonna have you continue actually, but this is a perfect example of we read all those words, we can read all those words, but we really don't know what's being said. And I'm right there with you. If I would read this and just keep reading and I didn't sit on a sentence, I would not know what was just said. 100%. And so let your brain catch up with your eyes. Like right now. So you're absolutely right when you said, hey, we know more about certain sounds than was known 5 centuries ago. That is, okay. So now just tell me, what is this part of the sentence saying? Focus on just the second half.
That like the previous musical, I guess, musical people from before were avoiding their mistakes.
Well, I think, okay, mistakes I think is a little strong, but we're saying we now, so we're saying we now know how sounds that these earlier people avoided using can effectively be used in composition now. Do you see that? It's kind of what you said. You just added, like, I'm not even changing that much in my translation, but what is this the example of? We understand how this is. What is this referring? What is this providing context to?
Musical development.
The knowing more about certain sounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you following? I know this is nitpicky, completely nitpicky.
So
And
don't refer back to the previous sentence. Like,
yeah, and then you're absolutely right. But then, so this is giving us our example of what we know more about certain sounds, because we're just saying we certainly know more about certain sounds. Well, what do we know? We know how sounds that earlier people avoided can now be used effectively. But then you're absolutely right. We use that whole sentence to then support. There are ways it makes sense to talk about knowledge growing over time. Fabulous. That was excellent. And then Yamira, can you finish it off for us?
Sure. Where, for example, right? Yeah. For example, we now know how the interval of the third, which is dissonant, can be used in compositions to create consonant musical phrases. So it's just giving another example of how music has developed and what we know now. So they're saying we know about the interval of the third and how they've used it in compositions to create consonant musical phrases. So it's just basically like another example of how what we now know about music and how it's developed.
And what part of the argument is this?
I'm
giving you the easy one.
Well, that's bad because I don't know. I don't think I know the terminology you're looking for.
Just an example. It's just a premise and it's
just okay.
An example.
Okay. Got it.
Everybody see that? Does everybody remember that from yesterday? People that were in class yesterday, how that's an example. And what an example is being used to, and why do we use that example, Yamira? What's the purpose of including this?
It's just giving us more support for how it changed over time, how musical knowledge changed.
Not how it, okay, yeah, how it changed over time, but then in turn to support
what we know about sounds, certain sounds.
Okay, okay, everyone go ahead and think 20 seconds on what you think the main conclusion of this argument is. All right, Ashley, what are you going with?
I think we understand how sounds that earlier composers avoided can be used effectively in musical compositions.
Does everybody agree with her? What do you think, Tori?
I was thinking the sentence before that, we certainly know more about certain sounds than was known 5 centuries ago.
Does everybody agree with Tori? But yeah, like, nah. I'm not making fun of you, Tori, at all. It's like everyone, I just want to show how people read these differently. What do you think, Lisa?
I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like the whole thing that I should be looking at is they're coming in with, although it's unwise to take the developmental view, they're saying there are ways to make sense when we talk about how musical knowledge has grown over time, and like everything else I feel like is supporting that.
Excellent.
So,
did y'all see that? No, you're spot on. And this is where being able to quickly pick up on that's a concession helps you here to recognize that we're contradicting something, and then we're offering all of this additional support to say why it makes sense to talk about musical knowledge growing over time. Because we're contradicting, though, although it's unwise to take a development view of an art like music, why would we say that unless we're trying to prove something? So what is this author trying to prove? They're trying to prove that it makes sense to talk about it sometimes, and this is why. Go ahead and put your answers in the chat once you're done.
I was looking at C, but then, I kind of saw that's not the main thing we're looking at.
Right. So we always have to pick our answer through the eyes of the conclusion. So our conclusion is there are ways in which it makes sense to talk about musical knowledge growing over time. So we want something that is as limited to that. Where C says it's inappropriate to take a developmental view of music. I mean, one, we say unwise, but unwise and inappropriate are kind of different. And two, that's our concession. Do you see that? And then D, our understanding of music can improve over the course of time. Absolutely, because that's why it makes sense to talk about it sometimes. All right, did everybody get the document I just sent in the chat?